Welcome to episode 2, where we'll be looking at why discounts can destroy a business quietly. So, before we begin discussing the logics and the calculations for this episode, let us look at some terms and what they mean. We'll begin with discount rate. So, discount rate is a percentage reduction from the original selling price. Example is saying that a selling price of a product is 10,000 naira. Then when you ask for a discount of 10%, 10% is then taken out. So the new price will now be the discounted price. So variable cost per unit is another term, and variable cost per unit is the direct cost of producing one unit, such as materials, packaging, or delivery, or anything that goes into the production of that unit, right? So the contribution per unit is the amount left from one sale after removing variable costs of that unit. So it represents the amount each unit contributes towards paying off fixed costs and generating profit. What about the margin compression? The margin compression is a decline in a company's profit margin occurring when the cost of producing goods or services rise faster than the selling price. This narrows the gap between revenue and expenses. Or simply put, we can say when the profit made on each unit becomes smaller, usually because price falls or cost rises. So the next is break-even units. So the break-even unit is the exact number of products a business must sell to cover all its total costs, that is both fixed and variable costs, right? Without making a profit or incurring a loss. So now let's look at our case for the day and the business logic we must apply to calculate them. So in our case now, we are looking at again why discounts can destroy a business quietly. But before we go into the results of the day, let us run some analysis. So the first will be to determine the discount rate applied. So Johnson's and Sons yogurt production company had given discount in month 2, and their strategy was to give a certain percentage discount so that they will increase sales. And as we see here, from month 1, where 0% discount was applied, you could see that the sale for that month was 1,000, and they sold each unit for 10,000 naira. In month 2, they applied a certain percentage discount and they had increased sales. That is, sales rose to 1,400 in month 2. That is rising by 400 sales. Okay. Now, let us determine the percentage discount that was applied. So to do that, we'll say equals original price, which is 10,000, right? So just open parentheses and say this, which is 10,000 and represents the original price, right? Minus the discounted price in month 2, the price was discounted to 8,500. So that is it, and it's in C5. We'll close our parentheses. The reason here is just a simple mathematical operation where we have to deal with this in the bracket and divide the answer from what we get in the bracket by the original price. Okay, so we'll say divide by what the original price. Okay, so when we do this, we can hit enter. But again, let's go over it again so that we see. We said original price, which is 10,000, minus the discounted price, which is 8,500 in brackets, because we want to get the answer of this divided by our original price, right? Let's hit enter. So we already formatted it here to be percentage, right? We formatted it to be percentage, and that is why it immediately say 15%. You notice that we didn't have to say multiply by 100, because if we multiply by 100, it will just give us 15. Okay? Our original answer would have been, for instance, let's do it here so that you see. If we say equals, open parentheses, we say 10,000, for instance, minus 8,500, right? Open parenthesis, close parenthesis rather, divide by 10,000, gives us what? 0.15. But if we multiply this by 100, it's going to give us 15. Okay, let's do that. You see, if we multiply by 100, it's going to now give us what? 15, but not 15%. If you format this to percentage, it's going to give you 1,500%, which is not the correct value. So, but when you take away the multiplication by 100, you see that you have the correct 15%. So in Excel, if you want to format to percentage, you just have to calculate it as it is without multiplying by 100. Excel understands when you format it to percentage, okay? So we're seeing that 15%, we see that 15% was applied to the month 2, okay? So we have determined that. We know our units are sold. That's the number of units that was sold in the various months. We know the selling price in the various months. We now know the discount that was applied. We have a fixed variable cost. That is, our variable cost in month 1 is exactly the same as the variable cost in month 2. That is, in both months, the cost of production for each unit will remain the same. So now let us determine our contribution per unit. And we already defined contribution per unit as the amount left from one sale after removing variable cost, right? So it's going to be simply us saying selling price per unit minus variable cost per unit. So we're going to say equals our selling price per unit in this month was 10,000 minus our variable cost per unit in this month was 6,000. So we are going to have 4,000 as the contribution per unit for each product, for that product rather, in month 1. So for month 2, we'll say equals our selling price was 8,500 minus our cost per unit, our variable cost per unit was 6,000. So we had 2,500. So to determine our revenue for month 1, it would be us saying the units sold multiplied by selling price per unit. You know, in episode 1, we already talked about what revenue was. Okay. So now we'll say equals, we'll say units sold. Our units sold in month 1 was 1,000. And we are multiplying it by selling price per unit. So we'll say shift 8 to enter multiplication sign. Then we'll say selling price per unit. Then we hit enter. So let us format this appropriately. Okay, or we could just copy this formatting here and apply. Okay, so let's go to format painter here, apply this formatting here. Okay, so now we have 10 million as our revenue, right? Remember how we got that revenue, right? Okay, so let us do the revenue or determine the revenue for month 2, and we'll say equals units sold in this month, which is 1,400, multiplied by the selling price per unit. Okay, the selling price per what? Per unit. And the selling price per unit for month 2 was 8,500, right? Let's hit enter, and we'll get our selling price per and we'll get our revenue for that month. Again, we can just copy this formatting and drop it there. So we can see from face value, you could see that, oh, okay, we have 10 million naira as revenue in month 1 and 11.9 million naira as revenue in month 2. So if we continue, are we going to get a better revenue margin for for month one or month two, or are we going to get better profits from month one or month two? So let's proceed and see. Remember, our title or topic for today is why discounts can destroy a business quietly. So let's see if that applies. So let us calculate our total contribution now. Our total contribution is looking at units sold multiplied by contribution per unit. You remember how we calculated contribution per unit, right? We calculated contribution per unit as selling price per unit minus variable cost per unit. So what we have as contribution per unit, we'll have to multiply it by the total units sold to get our total contribution now. Okay, so say equals units sold for this month multiplied by contribution per unit. That will give us our total contribution for month one. What about total contribution for month two? Units sold in month two multiplied by our contribution per unit in month two. Okay, so we have that now. So again, I just want to copy this formatting and paint it here. So you see that in month one, our total contribution is 4 million. However, in month two, our total contribution is 3.5 million. So here we had our fixed cost stated as 2.5 million for both months, right? Month one and month two. For us to look at profit, we want to say total contribution minus fixed cost. Okay, total contribution minus fixed cost. We will get our profits that way. Now, let me state simply that you could also determine profit from revenue if you have determined your fixed cost and your variable cost. So you see, what we have done by our total contribution here is to have removed our variable cost from each of the units sold. You remember that, right? When we calculated our contribution per unit, we took away our variable cost for each unit. So when we took away our variable cost for each unit, we used that contribution per unit without variable cost, that is, multiplied it by the units sold to get our total contribution, right? So you see that already we had taken away our variable cost. In your own simple way, you could do this and see if you get the same value. You could do this, right? To say you determine the variable cost for the units, right? Variable cost for the unit plus fixed cost, and take it away from revenue and see if you get the same answer. Okay. So let's go ahead and do this. Then we'll try what we just said now so that you see the difference. So for profit, we'll say total contribution, right? Total contribution for month one is 4 million minus our fixed cost is 2.5 million for month one. We hit enter and we now get our profit. Our profit is 1.5 million. So let us do the same for month two and see if we are going to get a lower or a higher profit, right? So we'll say equals our total contribution is 3.5 million minus our fixed cost for month two remains static, which is 2.5 million, right? So you can see now, before we are not even gone far, we've seen that in month two, where discount was applied, the 15% discount was applied, we had more sales, right? We sold more product. Now, variable cost remained the same, but revenue increased, right? But we can see that even though fixed cost remained static, you can see that we had a short of 500,000 in profit, right? That is why when businesses are actually developing strategies for discount application for the sake of increasing sales, the question is it really improving profit or just number of units sold? So that's the question analysts will ask. So now You see, we talked about different ways we could have calculated our profit, right? Remember, we said that we removed variable costs from our contribution per unit. So it was easy for us to just determine our total contribution, then subtract fixed costs from total contribution to get our profit. But you could calculate profit as this. You say revenue minus cost, right? We could say profit equals revenue minus cost. So here we were given variable cost per unit. So if we must know our total variable cost, right, is to multiply our variable cost per unit by the total unit sold. Okay, so that will be us saying that is for month one, we'll say equals this 6,000 naira here multiplied by the units sold. We will now have 6 million naira as the variable cost for month one. Okay, you can see, right? So this is for month one. For month two, we can say our variable cost per unit is 6,000, right? Multiplied by unit sold, which is 1,400. It will now give us what? Total variable cost for month two. So if we add this with our fixed cost, if we add this with our fixed cost for each month, let us just add that, okay? We can say equals sum. We want to add the total variable cost for month one and or with our fixed cost for month one, okay? We hit enter. We are going to get our total cost, right? We're going to get our total cost for month one. What about month two? We'll say equals sum. Sum is a function that is used to add up. We'll say a sum, open parentheses, our variable cost for month two. We are adding that with our fixed cost for month two, and we hit enter. So you see here, we now have our total cost, which include the total variable cost and the fixed cost. So we have our cost. So let's say this is cost, right? So this is just an example, right? To show us that what we had done initially is correct, okay? Then let us now look at profit. Okay, let's look at profit. Remember this formula we used there, right? Let's look at profit. So for profit for month one, if we were using revenue minus cost, will be equals our revenue for month one was 10 million naira, right? If we subtract our costs, right, from month one and hit enter, will be what? 1.5 million. You see? Is correct, right? Exactly the same. So let us do that for month two. We say equals, and we said revenue for month two was 11.9 million minus our cost for month two is 10.9 million. If we do that, we get exactly the same answer. So this was to show you that we had broken down the formula earlier step by step when we calculated contribution per unit as subtracting variable cost per unit from our selling price to get the contribution per unit. And we now multiplied our contribution per unit by the total, that is by the units sold per month to get our total contribution. So for us to calculate our profit, we just use total contribution minus fixed cost to get our profit. Okay, so I now showed you how profit equals revenue minus cost was a wholesome formula from which we derived the formula we used to calculate in earlier. Okay, so let us go on to break-even units. Okay, remember I would say break-even unit is the number of units the business must sell so that profit becomes zero. So there's no loss, there's no profit. So it's zero, there's break-even. Okay, so to calculate that, we can say here fixed cost divided by contribution per unit. Fixed cost divided by contribution per unit. So I'm also going to use an expanded formula to show you that we could get the same thing here. So fixed cost, right? We'll say equals, what was fixed cost? Fixed cost was 2.5 million for month one. And we'll say we want to do divide by contribution per unit, which is 4,000 in month one. So that gives us our figure for the break-even units. Okay, the units we need to break even. Okay, that's the units we need to break even. So here for month two, we said equals fixed cost, which is 2.5 million divided by contribution per unit. We hit enter. You see the effect of discount, right? Because of the discount in month two or applied in month two, we need 1,000 units to break even. But if we maintain the original selling price, which we did in month one, we needed 625 units to break even. Okay, now you can have a break even formula as this. Okay, we could say break even units equals fixed cost divide by selling price per unit minus variable costs per unit. Okay, so if we look at this carefully, we say break-even units equals fixed cost divided by selling price per unit minus variable cost per unit. If we look at this, you see that our formula here, which is fixed cost, or the formula we used earlier, which is fixed cost divided by contribution per unit, is actually very correct. So what did we use as contribution per unit? Contribution per unit was selling price per unit minus variable cost per unit. So you see that we have already satisfied the denominator, right? So here in the break-even unit, you see we have fixed cost, right? The contribution per unit is what we had already done here. You can look at it. Contribution per unit is selling price per unit minus variable cost per unit. So that is what we have here as a denominator, right? You can see that, okay? Which is selling price per unit minus the variable cost per unit. You can see that, right? Okay. So we have done that and explained the result. So let's look at our margin compression. And we said the margin compression is what? Previous margins minus the current margin. That is going to be our formula for that. So here is month one. So we don't have a previous margins, right? We don't have previous margin here. So we do that for month two to see margin compression, okay? So now is for us to determine our margin compression. But before we determine our margin compression, we would like to calculate our gross margin. So I'm going to insert another row here, and I'll call this gross margin. Okay, so we'll calculate the gross margin here for month one and the gross margin for month two. Let me input the formula here basically. So our gross margin is selling price per unit minus variable cost per unit divided by selling price per unit. And when you are calculating manually, you know it's a margin, so it's a rate, so we could use multiply by 100. But because we are doing that in Excel, we won't have to use multiply by 100. I believe you understand that. So our selling price per unit is 10,000, right? While our variable cost per unit is 6,000. So divide by that same selling price, right? So if we say equals our selling price per unit is 10,000 minus our what variable cost per that unit is 6,000. Okay, we want to divide it by the selling price per unit. Okay, so to do that correctly, we'll have to put this in parentheses, okay, so that we will be able to do that mathematically correct. So we will now say selling price, right, per unit. So the selling price per unit is 10,000, okay? So we hit enter, we are going to have 0.4. If we multiply this by 100, we will have 40%, right? But we can just format it to percentage so that it gives us our 40%. You see that, right? So let us calculate the gross for margin for month 2. So which will be equals our selling price per unit is 8,500, right? Remember in parentheses, okay? So open parentheses, selling price per unit, minus our variable cost per that unit. So the variable cost per that unit is 6,000, close parentheses, divide by our selling price per unit, which is 8,500, okay? We hit enter and it gives us that. So if we multiply this by 100, manually to give us about 29.4 thereabout. So but we can just format this into percent and we get 29. Okay. With this, we can easily now determine our margin compression, okay, which will be our previous margin, which is 40%. Okay, we'll say equal to our previous margin 40% minus our current margin 29%. Hit enter and we will have our margin compression of 11%. So I hope that is clear. So we can conclude that the discount applied, the 15% discount applied, did not yield the expected results. We can see we need more units to break even compared to when we did not apply the discount. You can also see that our profit were not as profitable as the month we did not apply the discount. Okay, all this even though revenue increased compared to the month where discount was not applied. Okay, I believe you've learned something valuable. So subscribe, share to more, and let's meet again Wednesday next week.